Welcome everyone. I'm Dr. Sarah Rawlinson from the University of Northampton, and I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on restarting tourism and hospitality industries post-COVID-19, where we consider how we can build our industries back better. This webinar is delivered in collaboration with the University of Northampton, the University of Johannesburg, the Future of Tourism Coalition, and Otolo. The University of Northampton is only 2 UK universities who have signed up to the Future of Tourism Coalition, working to shape the future of tourism. And I certainly hope that many more UK universities will join this organisation and work with the University of Northampton and the Future of Tourism Coalition on this very important matter. I'd like to welcome our audience from around the world, and particularly the students, because it's those young people who will be the future of tourism and hospitality. So thank you very much for joining us. We have a change to our programme today. Unfortunately, Dr. Stefan Hartmann, from the Head of Department of European Tourism Futures at the Institute of NHL Stenden University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, is unable to join us due to a personal emergency. But I'd really like to thank Ben Lynam from the Travel Foundation, who is going to talk to us today about destination stewardship in his place. So I'd like to hand over to Ben for him to make his opening remarks. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for having me here today. Yes, I'll do my best to cover off also what Stefan was going to talk about this morning, at least my time. We do work together closely, and particularly on the area of destination stewardship that Stefan was looking to talk about. So I hope that I shall reasonably ably be able to cover that for him. So I will just begin by sharing my screen. Okay, so actually, I mean, what's helpful is that I was previously down to talk about the future of tourism and the future of tourism coalition. And of course, I'm more than happy to also talk about destination stewardship, because I believe that the future of tourism is destination stewardship, and so do many others who have either joined the coalition or are part of looking at the trend in destination stewardship. Apologies for the image here. We'll hopefully manage the transition to destination stewardship without the need for rocket fuel. It doesn't particularly sit well with carbon targets, and hopefully we won't need to find another habitable planet in the meantime either. So let's just start at the beginning. We have seen, of course, international tourism arrivals growing exponentially for decades. And obviously, there have been a couple of hiccups in that trend, and we're in a rather large one of those right now. But up to a point, growth has been around 4% year on year since for many decades. And up to a point, growth has been a proxy for benefits. Tourism numbers have been a convenient KPI, key performance indicator, that was easy and achievable, and it seems to convert into lots of economic benefit. And you may well be familiar with many of the benefits that the organizations like the World Travel and Tourism Council and the UN's World Tourism Organization have promoted very hard, actually, for decades, to try and demonstrate the importance of tourism for the economy, for the global economy. So 1 in 10 jobs, etc. But actually, it's much harder to find out any information about the costs. And surely no destination wants tourism at any cost. So in 2019, we released a report with Eplerwood International and Cornell University called Destinations at Risk, the Invisible Burden of Tourism. It's freely available, and I hope you will have some time to look at it if you haven't already. the report describes how the relationship between more visitors and more benefits provides diminishing returns. So not only do the costs or the burdens increase, but visitor demand begins to reach and breach various limitations. This doesn't always require large numbers. Tourism is often in places that are particularly vulnerable, such as fragile ecosystems or places where there are traditional ways of life, as that's what makes them special. Even small numbers can lead to degradation. So the invisible burden relates to shared or common pool resources between the tourism sector and the community. The travel and tourism is, of course, highly reliant on common pool resources, natural habitats, historical monuments, water and energy, public spaces, infrastructure, and social and cultural capital, which, when taken together, basically amount to the destination. But even before the current situation with tourism, we saw these underlying root causes. All destinations have been grappling with these issues for some time, and you'll see this within destination management strategies across the world. We can avoid the mistakes of the past, and as tourism recovers, it's easy to imagine that without significant changes, the same challenges will be there. Destinations and businesses alike struggling with seasonality, economic leakage, low margins, overcrowding, overconsumption, overdependence, fragile environments, exclusion and inequity, not to mention threats from future pandemics and, of course, climate change. These haven't gone away with COVID, and if anything, they have been exacerbated. But during the travel restrictions and the COVID pandemic, we did see a new hashtag, and that was a common slogan that everyone started to say, really, which was to build back better. And it's a great sentiment. As COVID struck, it really did seem to be that there was a sea change in attitudes. I guess there was less competition around, and it felt that there was much more collaboration. Change felt possible, and there was a new appreciation of the environment. People had a pause to think. But our concern was, is this just an empty platitude? Will things actually just go back to business as usual once tourism and travel returns? And so, together with 5 other NGOs, 6 in total, we came together and formed the Future of Tourism Coalition. Our objectives were to amplify our voice, to build a community, but mainly to provide a shared vision for recovery. So to put communities and destination needs at the heart of tourism development and management. Better could mean all sorts of things to all sorts of people. We wanted to make it more specific. So we had 13 guiding principles for the future of tourism. These 13 guiding principles provide a framework for recovery plans, and nearly 600 organizations, businesses, destinations, media, and universities, including, as we just heard, the University of Northampton, have signed up to these principles. And I'd ask everyone listening to consider if their organization could also sign up to these. By putting communities at the heart of tourism, there is a question which DMOs and businesses are beginning to ask. And while it's simple and may seem obvious, it is leading to some transformative thinking. Why do we want tourism? So obviously tourism is an economic activity principally, but we know, don't we, that it's more than that, that it can benefit all walks of life. It's a transversal sector. So, but we don't want tourism for tourism's sake. It can't just be growth for growth's sake. And with this question, we're also thinking about the we in the question, which means moving from a mandate handed by DMOs from their traditional constituency, businesses, essentially tourism stakeholders, to a brave new world of putting residents and community needs at front and center of destination management. And again, we saw this happening even before COVID, particularly in the move from destination marketing to destination management. And we began to see strategies appear that reflected this. I've put a few up on the screen here. There are many more examples, and the OECD Tourism Trends report on screen also flagged this trend. So there's been a focus, the focus has been a shift from quantity to quality tourism. And although a few destinations have a more nuanced understanding of what quality should be, in most cases, I would say quality is understood to basically mean higher spending tourists. So it's an attempt to stabilize volume, but still grow value. And these trends we see as part of a longer term drive, which was happening well before COVID, but COVID has certainly accelerated some of these trends. So we've been working with the European Tourism Futures Institute, which Dr. Stefan was going to represent today, and the World Travel and Tourism Council on a white paper to look at how we might accelerate these trends towards destination stewardship. And we identified these long-term drivers, the grey hexagons on screen, and as well as some barriers. So the fragmented industry, the fact that there was no clear mandate, this clash of cultures and agendas particularly between public and private sector, and a lack of knowledge and data. And we felt, therefore, that there was an urgent need to address some fundamental governance issues to allow destination stewardship to come about more quickly. So the European Tourism Futures Institute had already come up with 4 potential scenarios for tourism in 2025 post-COVID, and I'll just pop these up on the screen for you now. So it looked first at whether or not the crisis would be short and shallow or long and deep. And on the y-axis, it looked at citizen and consumer behaviour and attitudes, and whether or not there would be more of an I attitudes to the future, or more of a we attitude. And they came up with 4 scenarios, basically looking at the likelihood of tourism transforming or transitioning with more of a we attitude driving the future, or either a collapse of the of tourism, or simply a return to business as usual with continued growth. Now, although we do see some examples of tourism transitioning and transforming with the bottom half of this axis, we also believe that there's a high chance that business as usual will come back as soon as it can, particularly with the pressures on businesses now to get some fluidity and some profit after a couple of very difficult years indeed. So we're now looking at how we can encourage a new model for destination management. And for that, we need to, first of all, just think about how the destination model might evolve. So a very simplified destination model of a traditional destination marketing organization is that they basically have marketing and selling and promotion as their overall so this might be a membership organization, or else linked to hotel bed taxes or similar mechanisms. And growth is going to be the #1 target, as we said previously. Whereas as tourism has grown over the last decade, the DMO model has adapted to this, and it's become increasingly aware of the vulnerabilities of tourism, such as leakage, seasonality, hotspots, and community conflicts. So marketing strategies have been developed to promote out of season tourism, local produce and local cultures, rural and less visited sites. And there's been a slight move into sustainability based on resource efficiency of the organizations and customer expectations. So things like energy use and perhaps tackling things like food waste and single-use plastic. So this still means more tourism is really the overall goal, without any particular checks and balances. But But first, sorry, let me just go back. This still means more tourism is the overall goal without checks and balances, and the target mandate remains unchallenged. Most destinations, we would say, are beginning to be here. But there is a problem with this, and this is the narrow definition of the product, which is being marketed and even managed. Tourism is often understood to be a set of visible assets, the hotel estates, the tour bus, the visitor attraction. And there isn't enough consideration of other components of the product, the environment, the communities, utilities, public spaces, all of these things which are needed to service tourism. And this is exactly how the invisible burden comes about. So leading destinations are now recognizing that it's not just a move from marketing to management that's needed, but a move to integrate destination thinking with tourism and tourists at the center, with place thinking, which has residents at the center. Destinations can and should be places where people live, work, play, study, and visit. So DMOs that develop products and experiences for visitors without thinking about the broader role of place and the needs of residents may not be contributing well to a thriving place, despite the obvious benefits typically brought to bear. So taking part in placemaking enables tourism to have a seat at the table with public and private sector to influence decisions on infrastructure, planning, retail, culture and sports, environmental protection, citizen well-being. And this is exactly what destinations have been longing for, to have a seat at that table and to be taken seriously in these discussions. It will offer many new possibilities and levers for innovation and product development and destination management. We're not saying that DMOs shouldn't retain their core expertise or necessarily expand their responsibilities beyond managing tourism and developing and marketing a destination. But there is a real opportunity to work within this paradigm, which has its foundations in resident engagement and satisfaction. But it does mean that new governance and collaboration is needed. So working with the WTTC and the European Tourism Futures Institute, we've developed a framework or diagnostic tool, which we are publishing within our white paper and are encouraging destinations to explore, which looks at different aspects of governance and the extent to which there are skills and systems and a mandate in place to actually manage a destination effectively and with an ethos of destination stewardship. So as you can see here, there's it basically is a simple table, although we are expecting that in reality, it would be a series of workshops, well facilitated with a number of different stakeholders to understand different perspectives on how tourism is governed and to identify areas where there might be room for improvement. So, for example, we're looking at practical ideas for overcoming the barriers and accelerating the drivers of triggers across these headings here that you can see before you. I can give you a few examples. So under mandate, if organizations are embarking on a new path towards destination stewardship, they need a new mandate. And there are a range of highly structured public participatory techniques that can be borrowed from other fields, particularly public health, that are beginning to be adopted by destination leaders. For instance, Amsterdam, Philadelphia, and Portland have engaged their citizens and relevant stakeholders in creating a thriving city portrait, which balances social, economic, and environmental needs. Crucially, destinations need a new vision and new measures of success that go beyond simply growth. And structurally, we need to encourage innovative new ways of working that are based on resolving real-world issues rather than legacy structures. This can involve utilizing virtual teams on platforms, creating protocols for sharing data, and creating new dashboards for management decisions, and ensuring that funding is based on management need. We have begun to see this happening to some extent during COVID, with tourism recovery task forces becoming a norm in many countries, including Canada, France, Ireland, New Zealand, Scotland, Netherlands. So we can see actually that there is certainly a increase in the in the importance of tourism on the agenda, as well as an increase in collaboration between public and private, as both see the importance of each other and rely on each other ever more. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. So we can now move on to questions, if we do have any. If you could please put them into the comments column, then I can pick up any questions that we might have for Ben. So Ben, can I ask you a question? Oh, we've got one coming up first of all from Gerard Franken at the Limpopo Provincial Tourism Association. The question is, if government does not support the industry fully, what alternative measures can be taken to secure international exposure and market access?
Okay, thanks for that, Gerhard. I mean, I guess what we're trying to say through this presentation is that it's really hugely important to have that public-private collaboration, and we believe, based on the scenarios that we explore within the white paper that we'll publish, that it isn't an optimum outcome to either have a private sector that's very influential on tourism decisions and is driving the destination stewardship agenda, even if they may well be able to make improvements and perhaps sort of organize themselves within their sector. It's certainly opportunities are missed there. And similarly, if it's just the public sector that's driving things, maybe introducing new policies, new laws, new incentives, then again, if they haven't properly involved the private sector in that, then those initiatives are potentially going to fall flat or be more costly than they should be, and that sort of thing. I mean, looking at the optimum blend, therefore, I mean, we're looking at a style of destination management that is definitely a public and private partnership, maybe not in a classic PPP sense of that, but certainly one that would be looking for support from both government and industry. Now, I'm just trying to make sure I specifically now answer this question. What alternative measures can be taken to secure international exposure and market access? I'm slightly struggling with the sense of that question, I'm afraid, Gerhard. I mean, if government doesn't support the industry, what measures can be taken by the industry to secure international exposure and market access? I mean, the industry itself doesn't necessarily need government support to do that. And actually, sometimes there's some questions over the extent to which government has a role, in fact, in providing that kind of promotional side of things. We know how much the industry is spending on promotion, and if you compare that to the amount that government spend, it obviously pales into something rather insignificant. So there's often a question mark even over the extent to which government expenditure on promotion, at least, is good value for money when potentially the private sector can do that well. And certainly, we would argue that a good proportion of that marketing spend could be spent elsewhere in investing in the destination assets, in these common pool resources that we were talking about. Apologies, Gerhard, if I haven't quite answered your question, but I'm not fully sure I've understood the sentiment.
We have another question for you, Ben, and it's from Michelle Alodia. What do you think are the obstacles traveling after the pandemic? Yeah, I mean, there are some significant obstacles still, and I mean, I was looking at a UNWTO report just this morning that was saying, you know, that they were expecting a loss of 4 trillion globally from the pandemic, and
and not to expect any return to 2019 levels until at least 2023. And I think that sounds about right. I mean, the obstacles traveling after the pandemic, I mean, clearly there are issues around attitudes, changes in attitudes, and that might be a nervousness of travelers to travel, but also a perhaps a nervousness or questioning of residents too around tourism. And I think that's important to emphasize, that this is this question that I put up previously, which is actually, why do we want tourism? Residents have just experienced 18 months of effectively having their cities and towns and beaches back for themselves. And whilst that has been not exactly a bed of roses for everyone in their community, particularly if they are highly dependent on tourism economically, equally, there'll be many people who are thinking, well, actually, wasn't that nice to not have the crowds and not be fighting for services like bus services or whatever it may be. So I think we do need to address this and start to rethink tourism as we come back to something that looks more like normal. But certainly, there's issues such as attitudes. There's also issues in terms of how the vaccine plays out. And we're now looking not just at the vaccinated, which tend to be in developed countries, but also the host destinations, and the fact that they will be certainly behind developed countries in terms of their vaccination programs. And potentially there's even some ethical questions there in terms of how we deal with that from a host visitor perspective. So I think there's a lot of issues still to grapple with as we start to move forward and hopefully build forward rather than build back.
Thank you, Ben. We have another question from my colleague at the University of Northampton, Anna Borley-Russell. She'd like to know, what do you think are the key challenges with destination stewardship?
That's a great question. I think the key challenges, certainly for I'll answer this in two different ways. For a destination management organization, as most marketing organizations are now calling themselves, the massive challenge is that they are now looking to expand their mandate and expand their influence, and yet they haven't necessarily changed their organization in any way. So that's the challenge, which I hope came through to some extent within the presentation, that actually it's not just about saying, well, we'll communicate a bit differently and we'll market things a bit differently, maybe sort of, not encourage people to visit at peak times and that sort of thing. It's actually, there's much more to destination stewardship than that. The other key to it, I think, is this need for collaboration, because destination stewardship begins to cut across all of these other issues that other people, other policymakers, other businesses are already looking at and grappling with. So it means that tourism needs to find a way to plug into, as I said before, basically the place-making community, and to think, actually, as a destination, where does this destination want to be in 5 and 10 years' time? Where does this place want to be in 5 or 10 years' time? What are the hopes of the community? And if tourism can then see how it is part of that discussion and part of that vision and can contribute to it, then I think the relationship between those of us in the tourism industry and our colleagues, maybe within planning departments or within retail or wherever it might be, will see our value and begin to invite us to the table. And that's where we can have the influence that we need to have when we come out with these strategies, which destinations are beginning to do. They're coming out with these great strategies saying we need to manage, we need to be destination stewards. But now they're really struggling with the next bit, which is, how do we actually put that into action?
I think we have a question there from the LinkedIn user, which says exactly that. how do we collectively assist business to adjust to this change, given the shock and survival of the situation that we're in? So any suggestions on how we might help move that agenda forward?
Yeah, I would first say things like the Future of Tourism initiative. We have nearly 600 organizations signed up to that now, and some really big players from the business community in there too. And the more we can do to bring the business and private sector into a new vision for tourism, the better. But certainly, I think that businesses need to have a new relationship with destinations, really. Up until this point, the personnel in charge of destination relations is likely to be someone perhaps in the sort of product development area, maybe someone also in marketing, and yet that there are sort of broader issues that destinations are looking to grapple with that require kind of wider collaboration rather than that kind of competitive set of values that they're currently bringing. And so I think that from a business side, first of all, it's trying to encourage businesses to see the benefits of destination stewardship, which I think there's a strong business case for destination stewardship. Clearly, it's the product that they are selling, and equally, when you show businesses that there is a plan for a destination, a well thought through plan, and when you show them that there may be some limitations to certain areas of growth, but that is going to mean that there is a protection of quality, then businesses often welcome these interventions, because if otherwise they are going to have to fill the gap themselves with more competitive activity. Otherwise, their competitors will do the same. So it's a kind of a race to the bottom if we're not careful, unless someone comes in and intervenes. And so quite often we see that businesses actually do welcome this approach. But clearly, there are some changes that need to be made, particularly, I think, to the relationship between businesses and destinations.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things linked to that James Kozo has mentioned is the skill shortage in the hospitality sector that many destinations are struggling with, particularly here in the UK.
Yeah, obviously this is a real issue right now, but it was a real issue before too. We've seen the exodus from the travel industry and the brain drain effectively that represents. But even before, with the Invisible Burden report that we published the year before COVID struck, we were describing how there was a real need to address the skills shortage in destination stewardship in particular. So skills around sort of digitalization, skills around maybe sort of mapping, and sort of a whole range, basically, particularly around data as well, understanding data and visualizing data and being able to look at various different models and scenarios. All of these disciplines are not traditionally part of a destination authority, at least. Now, that might mean, again, a stronger case for collaboration, because often these skills exist elsewhere within a destination. And so if we are able to tap into those skill sets and work in a smarter way across sectors and across disciplines, then I think that's probably a likely model for destination management and destination stewardship in future. But absolutely, we at the Travel Foundation are currently looking at training for destination managers in a whole range of areas around this, and we would certainly encourage other organizations to do the same.
Right. I think we'll finish on one note, which is from Alexandra Gillies, who has given us a comment around the New Zealand government reducing their dependency on international tourism, particularly issues related to over-tourism. to make regions more resilient. Is there a model to follow in relation to over-tourism, perhaps?
I mean, I would just, well, so two thoughts on that. A switch to domestic doesn't necessarily mean a reduction in over-tourism. There have been plenty of destinations that have struggled during the pandemic from over-tourism. It's just been domestic over-tourism, so it's still one to watch out for. But certainly, as a model to follow, I think reducing dependency on international tourism is very wise, and it would help build a more resilient economy, a more resilient visitor economy, and clearly, you know, the carbon is a big issue too, and we're going to need to begin to start coming to terms with the fact that we will need to fly less, and but perhaps have longer stays in places and have better quality experiences in places. But equally, the switch, I think, over the last sort of 18 months to domestic has been positive in other ways for the industry, because businesses have had to think about a new market and how to get value from that new market. It means that residents, as well as people who are in the vicinity, are beginning to benefit more from services that might otherwise only be focused on international tourists. And I think ultimately that delivers a better quality experience for all, a more authentic experience for all. Tourists are often looking for that kind of authentic experience. They don't want to feel like this has just been completely conjured up for them. So I think that sort of more blended approach is certainly one to support and to try and retain for as long as possible. But of course, it needs to be managed. Still needs to be managed in the same way. You know, this could still be issues around over-tourism, that sort of thing, and there is clearly a need to try to improve on the value that domestic tourism is bringing, because international tourists tend to spend more.
We have a question, because we have a lot of educators here on our webinar today. Pete van der Meer from the Northwest University in South Africa has made a comment in relation to how universities need to change their education content in relation to perhaps your models and whatever going forward. I think that's something that we all need to do, and I would be encouraging more and more universities to join your organisation in relation to looking at these new models and keeping abreast of what it is that Tourism Future needs to be looking at. Would you agree?
Definitely. I mean, I'm not sure if well, I would recommend basically that people look through the Invisible Burden report that we published. It does set out a number of areas where we particularly around basically holistic accounting of the costs of tourism. That's sort of an essential kind of core of what that report is all about. And so being able to identify those costs and allocate a cost per tourist effectively, or cost per visitor, so that there's an understanding that every, that as you plan for growth, you understand what that's going to do for all of the costs. And I hope I'm being clear that by costs, I mean, social costs, environmental costs, as well as economic costs. So what are those costs, as well as the benefits, as various elements of tourism may grow or decline? And that's sort of the core, really, of how tourism can be managed, by understanding those impacts. So I think that's probably at the core of what's needed. But clearly it's then the extent to which the pressing onto other disciplines within placemaking should be something that's sort of taught in more detail through courses, or sort of left as a sort of handover for another course to deal with. And I'll leave you guys to worry about that.
Well, we've had lots of questions, and I promise this is our final question, because you've taken quite a few already. But this is from Sunitha Hanif. What do you think about the application of circular economy in the tourism industry and the pandemic?
it's absolutely up there as one of our guiding principles within the 13. You know, how we're seeing the reset, which we hope we're looking at a reset of tourism, and we sort of see that fundamentally to that, you need to have a destination stewardship approach. You need to think about new KPIs and success measures for the industry. And last but not least, you need to start developing more sustainable product. And that, I think, is where the circular economy comes in. And so, you know, I mean, we at the Travel Foundation, we have projects on the go working with hotels and restaurants and other organizations, looking at how to change practices towards a more circular economy. Unfortunately, the pandemic has been a setback for that in many ways, particularly with things like single-use plastic, as we've seen more and more single-use coming back as a sort of seemingly as a means to demonstrate health and safety standards, but we would question that. There are certainly other ways that you can do that, and you can still reuse items. But I think that you know, there are some real key areas that we need to grapple with quickly, and that is around the climate emergency and around the circular economy. You know, we need to stop kind of playing around the edges of these two sort of rather major issues and start taking them seriously and making real progress. And so that's what I hope we're really going to be able to do over the over this coming decade.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was really interesting topic, and thank you so much for stepping in at the last minute for Stefan. So thank you, and I'm sure we're all giving you a massive round of applause.
Thank you, and thanks for the questions, everyone.
Thank you. So I'm going to move on now to introduce our next two speakers, and then at the end of those two presentations, we'll take another further round of questions. So our first speaker will be Maisa Adinolfi, a lecturer at the School of Tourism and Hospitality at the University of Johannesburg. Her research interests include youth tourism, language travel, domestic tourism, and social tourism. And she'll be followed by Felix Windegger, a researcher in the fields of ecological economics, social ecological transformation, and degrowth. He works at the Centre for Advanced Studies at URAC Research and co-leads the Sustainable Tourism Observatory in South Tyrol. They will be providing an academic perspective on the impact of COVID on tourism. And we're going to start with Maisa. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm just going to try and share my screen. Okay. Apologies, I just want to make sure that this is being shared. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Like Sarah said, I am a lecturer at the School of Tourism and Hospitality at the University of Johannesburg in South Africa. And I'm going to be just talking from an academic perspective in terms of certain research agendas or the shifts in research agendas, particularly in the African context and the developing world context. And then I'm going to be talking about domestic tourism and South Africa's sort of experience around domestic tourism's contribution to the recovery, post-COVID-19. And I'm also going to be briefly talking about some research which myself and two other colleagues have contributed to the post-COVID-19 research agenda around tourism. So as academics, we are used to seeing these kinds of maps with these statistics and year-on-year growth, as Ben was talking about earlier. And then, with COVID-19, we see these kinds of dramatic changes. And it sort of shakes the core of everything that we do. And we need to rethink about how we look at research and how we look at how tourism is going to sort of move forward. And then, you know, we have a look at the same map looking very, very differently, very, very different. And one of the biggest concerns, particularly, is around, you know, the loss of jobs that that tourism supports. And so it becomes very, very important to think very carefully around how we are going to recover from this, and obviously doing things differently in the future, and not particularly going back to the kind of normal which we were used to beforehand. So in terms of tourism research and thinking about COVID-19 and how it has sort of changed the research agenda, Rogerson and Baum, for example, provide a very nice summary around certain core areas which are very important for us as researchers in Africa to really think about. So, for example, Ben was also talking about many of these aspects. You know, market confidence around how tourists, you know, are thinking about traveling and their intentions to travel, and their concerns around health and safety, but also that of communities, and how this has changed the way in which people are going to make decisions around travel. There's also concern in terms of research around countries which are very dependent on long-haul visitors and international visitors as well. So many African countries are very much reliant on international long-haul travelers, which are consuming high-value or premium tourism products and services. And therefore, you know, the research and those countries need to really think about, you know, how they're going to sort of shift their focus on their markets, and think about the quality and quantity, which Ben alluded to as well. There's also a greater push for supporting regional, domestic, and VFR tourism, as many borders have been closed and opened again and closed again. And so regional tourism in the African context, and particularly in Southern Africa, is very, very important. In the South African context, for example, in terms of our international numbers, the majority of those are actually our regional neighbors. And then the focus on domestic and VFR tourism, which I'm going to be talking about, particularly domestic tourism, and South Africa's experience around that in terms of recovering from the impacts of COVID-19. Other areas include redefining community-based tourism. Ben was also talking about this in terms of the effects that the mass reduction in tourist numbers in many communities has had. And really, we need to think, those communities really need to rethink about, you know, how tourism is going to, has affected them, and perhaps think about shifts to other forms of tourism, or maybe reconsider tourism altogether. Then there are areas, and particularly in the African context and the developing world context, in terms of research around the informal sector and its resilience. It tends to be particularly resilient, and it makes a very, very important component of tourism services. And then tourism and climate change, very, very important. Those drastic reduce in numbers has obviously reduced the environmental impact, but we need to also consider other socioeconomic impacts and other environmental impacts in terms of how tourism will return in specific destinations and communities that are tend to be more sensitive than others. And then lastly, in terms of addressing the present-mindedness of African tourism scholarship, in talking about understanding the historical development around tourism in Africa and learning from those lessons, and being able to apply them in this post-COVID-19 context to make sure that we, you know, don't repeat history per se. In terms of the South African context, some key areas of research which even Rogerson has contributed to as well is around areas of vulnerability, especially with regards or links to the geographic distribution of tourism and domestic tourism in South Africa, where there are certain parts of the country which are more highly dependent on tourism, making them a lot more vulnerable to the effects that COVID-19 has had on tourism in general. So why, domestic tourism? Domestic tourism has been highlighted as a very important component of many recovery plans in many countries, regardless of, whether it's the developed world or the developing world. And in South Africa, that's no exception. And there are certain things in terms of research and trying to think about domestic tourism's role in this COVID-19 recovery. and certain aspects which we need to consider. So again, Rogerson have provided some key areas for thought around this kind of impact, and that includes thinking about the new tourism psyche in terms of how comfortable tourists will be in international travel and domestic travel, and obviously how that influences the decisions they make. Also issues around travel intentions and the changing mobilities. Things are definitely changing in terms of the choice of the mode of transport, and those that are available to people, and how they're going to be moving around, and obviously the restrictions which many governments have imposed in terms of travel bans, etc. And also the travel intentions and changing patterns of demand itself, right? And this is going to be driven by things like safety, cleanliness, and hygiene, and perhaps even other areas that are more remote, like rural areas, natural areas, will be seeing greater numbers as people sort of shy away from the more touristy populated areas, which are typical destinations. And then lastly, areas around how technology is going to be affecting this particular recovery. So why domestic tourism? Domestic tourism is often somewhat ignored in the face of international tourism, which obviously attracts foreign exchange, and for many developing countries, this is obviously extremely attractive. Many of the efforts in growing tourism has been sort of focused on growing international tourism rather than domestic or even regional tourism. And interestingly, we can see many countries which actually have their tourism economy being made up, or the majority of it being made up from domestic tourism. This is just another visual in terms of the reliance on domestic tourism for many countries. And in South Africa, we're sort of quite there, just over the 50% mark. Domestic tourism in South Africa presents a very interesting example in terms of how domestic tourism is going to contribute to the road to recovery post-COVID. There are some key things to note about domestic tourism in South Africa, which makes it a particularly unique or interesting experience. And firstly is the historical or political legacies that still have an impact on domestic tourism today, and particularly the legacy left behind from the apartheid policies, restrictive policies for the majority Black population in South Africa. As I mentioned before, there's been a massive emphasis on obviously trying to grow international tourism, obviously being very attractive in terms of earning foreign exchange. We also have concerns around the geographic distribution or the concentration of domestic tourism in particular areas that are linked to things like the political legacy in South Africa, but obviously that creates areas where tourism areas that are more vulnerable to the effects of COVID-19 on tourism. And obviously we need to think about those kinds of things. There have been some very major barriers to the participation in domestic tourism in South Africa. So, for a government to say, yes, let's look at domestic tourism as a way, to kick off our recovery from tourism. But in the South African experience, there are quite a few obstacles in domestic tourism alone, which need to be addressed in order for us to sort of extract as much value from domestic tourism as we can in this recovery. And one of the biggest challenges is that around affordability in terms of costs and low incomes. And this has been, very much impacted, by COVID-19, where people have lost their jobs or the income has been slashed, and disposable income is obviously becoming extremely rare, for the use of to be used on tourism or travel, and particularly leisure travel. There's also a particular sort of known lack of interest in travel amongst South Africans, and the escalating costs of petrol, poor public transportation makes it quite difficult for that to take place. There's also been notes and research around our limited leveraging of visiting friends and relative tourism, which has a very rich history in South Africa, and again is linked to the political legacies. There's also very limited volume of domestic business tourism, And lastly, a limited tourism culture amongst South Africans. This idea that travel is sort of part of your life, and it's something that should, be part of your everyday, well, not everyday life, but part of your life. So in trying to push to make domestic tourism more accessible and affordable in South Africa, we need to really think about if we're going to be using domestic tourism to try and recover from the effects of COVID-19, we need to address the issues which already exist in terms of growing domestic tourism. And the biggest one by far is the affordability and accessibility for the majority of South Africans. Now, there have been many initiatives over the years, obviously before COVID, like the Short Left campaign that has tried to encourage domestic travel, and particularly amongst the youth, to have that sort of lifelong value that can be extracted from, being a tourist at such a young age, and sort of embracing tourism as part of your life. And however, the significant lack of travel culture, together with the political legacy and economic hardships which many South Africans face, this has hampered the growth of domestic tourism in the country. But with COVID-19 sort of shifting the attention and focus to domestic tourism, it is now more important than ever to try and address these barriers to domestic tourism. So the research which myself and my two colleagues have contributed to the COVID-19 agenda is around addressing the issues of affordability in South Africa. And we sort of bring to the party here the idea around travel stokvels, leisure on lay-by, and pay at your pace, which is ways in which to open up opportunities to make tourism more accessible to those who may not be able to afford it, but could perhaps save up for it in an extended period of time. So in the South African context, as unemployment rates are relatively high, it's become really important for South Africans to be able to find the funds to travel and to participate within in domestic tourism. There are some concerns around South African savings culture and affordability around tourism. South Africa has this ongoing economic battle, and particularly amongst the youth in terms of unemployment, and due to previous economic circumstances and increasing household debt as well, especially amongst the middle and poorer classes, we're sort of on survival mode, and tourism sort of is pushed to the side, or travel, particularly for leisure purposes, is sort of pushed to the side. Almost as a luxury. So the affordability of tourism in South Africa has been a long-time concern, and especially around the perceptions of affordability around domestic tourism, a lack of pricing structures that are specifically designed to make domestic tourists more inclusive within the domestic tourism offerings. So we've seen more attention being paid to international tourism as opposed to domestic tourism. So there have been some marketing efforts, which I've mentioned previously, but that's really not enough. So the availability of alternative savings and perhaps even payment options, such as stokvels, lay-bys, etc., will open up some opportunities for domestic tourism alongside the existing national marketing efforts. So a stokvel, for those who are not familiar with the concept, it originated from the stock fairs or auctions of cattle in the early 19th century. Basically, it is a social or collective community-based organization or effort, a savings scheme among people who want to achieve the same goal. So you'll have a certain amount of people contributing financially to the same goal, and then they will have access to those funds. And this is something which has existed and grown quite substantially in the South African context. Stokvels are incredibly big business. They contribute over 50 billion rand to the country's economy annually. Stokvels have traditionally been used for things other than tourism, but only recently has appeared or surfaced within the tourism arena. And interestingly, although the stokvel system was initially an alternative to the formal banking system, all South African banks now offer stokvel or savings clubs products. So the availability of stokvels and the opportunity to save collectively for tourism is there, but it hasn't really been something which has been spoken about in the literature. When we had a look at the sort of historical background of these stokvels and other paying systems, we sort of looked back at around 20 years ago was really the first record of a stokvel-like initiative being used in tourism. So it's not something that is completely new, but something which has started to sort of take pace and grow within how tourism and domestic tourism has developed over time. So, for example, some major organizations like Flight Centre, which is a major travel operator, as well as Tourvest Travel Services, have also been offering these services, and even some accommodation establishments have been offering opportunities for people to pay, their trip up in installments before people go. So there's definite evidence that the tourism sector is picking up on this trend, and trying to offer this opportunity for locals to be able to participate in domestic tourism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Maisa. That was really interesting to learn about how you're developing domestic tourism in South Africa and the contribution that your research is making. So thank you. I'm going to introduce Felix now, who's going to give us another perspective in relation to his research. So thank you very much, Felix.
Thank you, Sarah. I'll share my screen now. So hello also from my side. My name is Felix Windegger, and I am a researcher at the Center for Advanced Studies at UREC Research, which is located in Bolzano, Italy. What I am going to talk about today is the impacts of COVID-19 on tourism, and specifically in South Tyrol, where I am from. And what I want to start with is a network of sustainable tourism observatories, which we are also part of. And what we are, and the whole network, the INSTA network, is trying to do is monitor the developments and the impacts of tourism at the destination level. This network was launched by the UNWTO in 2004, and it currently consists of 31 members. It provides some sort of platform to connect the observatories and to foster a discussion between us, and it enables us to discuss new and emerging topics and to share also our knowledge and our experiences. Here you can see the locations of the current observatories. As you can see, there are observatories in almost all continents, but in the United States and also in South Africa at the moment, as of now, there are unfortunately no observatories, and we are also the only one in Italy at the moment. Now let's come to the Sustainable Tourism Observatory of South Tyrol, where I am part of. It was launched in 2018 with two main objectives. The first one being to contribute to the theoretical conceptualization and the measurement of sustainability in tourism. And we are trying to do this, for instance, by exploring explored or new dimensions of sustainability, such as health or also culture. And then the second main objective is to support the local VMO and also the regional government in the implementation and the governance of sustainable tourism, which means that our main goal is here to support evidence-based policy making. And we do that by systematically and timely and regularly monitoring the impacts and the developments of tourism in South Tyrol at the highest data granularity possible, which means at the municipal level whenever this is possible. And we have 31 indicators at the moment in 13 issue areas, which are thematic areas, and they are all part of one of the three classical dimensions of sustainability, so the social, the ecological, and the economic dimension. We do not only monitor, but we also try to communicate what we have found and we publish one report a year. And in addition, we have a website where we publish all the newest information, and we have some nice interactive graphs and visualizations. South Tyrol, for those of you who don't know it, it's a small province in the Italian Alps. So here on the map on the right-hand side, you can see it. It has borders to Austria and Switzerland. It has only about 500,000 inhabitants, so it's a pretty small province. And it has three main official language groups, namely German, with about 70% of the population, and 26% are Italian speaking, and 5% are Latin speaking. And Latin is an old Retro-Romanic language that is spoken mostly in the Dolomites region. And some of you might know the Dolomites. They are one of the most famous landscapes that we have in South Tyrol, and you see it here in the picture in the bottom of this slide. Tourism is very important for South Tyrol. In 2018, it accounted for more than 11% of total GDP, and in 2019, we counted 7.7 million tourist arrivals and 33.7 million overnight stays. So we are a highly touristic region. But as for all the destinations worldwide, the COVID-19 pandemic had a huge impact on the numbers of arrivals and stays. As you can see here at the bottom of the slide, the arrivals fell by 40% compared to 2019.
Hi, Felix. Your microphone is quite scratchy. I was wondering, is there a possibility that you could just try and adjust your microphone a little?
Yes, a second. 1 second. I can also use the headphones if that helps.
Let's just try that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's so much better. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. As I said, the numbers of tourist arrivals dropped by 40% compared to 2019 in 2020, and also the number of overall overnight stays dropped by 35%. And this difference means that on average, those who came in 2020 stayed a bit longer than those who came in 2019. And for certain periods in the year, the fall of the arrivals and overnight stays was even bigger. And as you can see here, on the right-hand side of the green line, you can see, first of all, that there are clear seasonal patterns. We have a summer season and a winter season. And right in between these seasons, the pandemic hit. So between March and June, 90% of guests didn't arrive that were there last year. And also, it's important to know that after some month in June, we were able to recover pretty quickly and pretty well, and had an almost normal summer season, especially in August, where the numbers reached almost the same levels as last year. But then again, as the second wave hit, the numbers plummeted, and they just recovered pretty recently. What we did in 2020 at our Sustainable Tourism Observatory is we tried to get an overall picture of the impact that the pandemic had on tourism in South Tyrol. And that's why we conducted 3 different surveys, one among guests coming to South Tyrol, one among the local population, and one among the entrepreneurs and firms in the tourism industry in South Tyrol. And for this presentation, we will only talk about these 2, the guests and the local population surveys. Just very quickly, for the survey among guests here, the target group obviously were the guests arriving in South Tyrol after the first lockdown, so between August and October. And it was a representative survey, and the interviews were conducted in hotels using tablets, the so-called CAMI interviews. In total, we were able to get 874 responses, and the median response time was 12 minutes. The second survey among the local population, here the target group were the households, and it was conducted in December 2020. It was also a representative survey at this time conducted via telephone. And in total, we were able to get 1,007 households responding. Of course, we don't have the time to go into detail about all the results, but I tried to structure it along the lines of 4 questions, and that we are going to try to answer. So the first question is, has the origin of guests changed? And here we can see that those the guests participating at this survey come predominantly from 2 countries. So most of them come from Germany, more than half of them, and then 35% from Italy. And there are some also from Switzerland and Austria. And these countries are also in other years are the main tourist markets for South Europe. And if we look now at the change, the percentage change in compared to 2019 in the same time period, we can see that the numbers for the main international tourist markets, so Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and also the Benelux countries, dropped significantly. But we can also see here that this fall was compensated by an increase in the number of Italian tourists coming to South Europe. So there were less international tourists and more national ones. The second question reads as follows: how was the guest-host relationship affected by COVID-19? And here we ask them, first of all, how important is the direct relationship with your host to you? And here an overwhelming majority said it's either very important or somewhat important, so more than 90%. Then we asked them if they reported any differences they noted in their relationship due to their host due to COVID-19. And here the majority said no, the relationship with my host has not changed. But there is also a majority, slightly more than 50%, saying that they are trying to keep greater physical distance to their host. And for the other 3 questions, there are no clear majorities. So there is the percentage of people disagreeing and agreeing is almost the same. This means there is no clear pattern, but there are some who apparently, for whom it has to some extent changed the relationship, and for others for whom it was not, had no impact at all. Have the needs and behaviors of guests changed because of COVID-19? Here we can see that 85% said they put more emphasis on hygiene due to the COVID-19 situation. But if we look at the other statements, we can see that most of them disagreed with them, which means that they didn't want to get more information on the latest COVID-19 developments in South Tyrol. They also didn't want more separation from other guests. And interestingly, they also said that they didn't want to have the opportunity to perform a COVID-19 rapid test on site. And they also didn't want to see a health certificate from their host. But in the interpretation of these results, we have to be cautious for 2 reasons mainly. First of all, because most of all for the question about the COVID-19 rapid tests, the situation has changed by now, because at the point where we asked them this question, they were not as widely available as they are now. So this might have changed. And the second reason is that there is some sort of pre-selection, because only those who are to some extent adventurous or who are not really afraid of the virus come to South Tyrol in the first place, or came to South Tyrol in the first place. Another question about the change of the behavior. So most of them said, yes, I tried to avoid crowds, and yes, I tried to stay outside in the fresh air. And there is also a majority saying that, yes, I also try to avoid public means of transportation. But then we see that they don't really isolate themselves. So they don't try to avoid contact with other guests, and even less with the local population. That they also, on average, don't want to spend more time in their accommodation due to COVID-19. Here, regarding the activities they carry out, we can see the gray bars indicate no big change. So we can see that at the bottom, those activities that increased are mostly outdoor activities, whereas those that decreased at the bottom are more cultural events and things and activities that are carried out inside mostly and together with other people. So here they seem to be a bit more cautious. And last but not least, the change in the means of transportation, we can see that quite a bit. So over 30% said that they use their private vehicle more than before the pandemic. And also, on the other hand, we see that public transportation like coach, bus, train, but also taxi are used less regularly and less often. The last question is, has COVID-19 affected the attitude of the local population towards tourism? And here we ask them, in your opinion, what influence does tourism have on life in South Tyrol? And 77%, so more than 3/4, said that the advantages overall of tourism in South Tyrol outweigh the disadvantages, which is a pretty high number actually. But then we compared this number to the numbers of a survey that was conducted in 2018. And here we can clearly see that the overall satisfaction has decreased, or the attitude has deteriorated, because in 2018, 95% of South Tyroleans saw the advantages outweighing the disadvantages, and both studies were representative of the South Tyrolean population. And we then tried to find out what might have caused this deterioration, and we asked them about some of the impacts of tourism. And this is just very briefly to show you that they are very well aware of important positive effects that tourism can have, and also about the negative effects that tourism can have. But if we compare the results for these statements to the exact same statements in 2018, we see no big variance, no big difference, which means we cannot really explain this fall in the level of satisfaction with our results. However, what might have played a role, and this was the last question that it was posed in the questionnaire, was that the COVID-19 pandemic might have had an impact. And here, more than 3/4, so 80% even, said that it somewhat increased or strongly increased the COVID-19 numbers in South Tyrol. And this is also now the Delta variant is mostly reported in hotels and related to tourism. So this might have played a role. So let's wrap up the results. So what were the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on tourism in South Tyrol? First of all, the origin of guests has changed. So we had more national tourists and less international ones. And then also some aspects related to the guests' behaviors and needs have changed. We have seen, for instance, the switch from public transportation to private cars and bicycles, but also that crowds are avoided, that higher hygiene standards are expected, and that on average more outdoor activities are carried out and less cultural events. At the same time, the guest-host relationship has remained mostly unaffected, not for everybody, but overall again. And then as a last point, the attitude of the local population towards tourism has deteriorated compared to 2018, which is also an important finding. The last slide, what is the role of monitoring for a responsible restart of tourism? And we think that monitoring the guests and the local population's needs and perception is important, because it helps to react to the changing demands, as now in times of crisis, and also to restore trust during a pandemic, for instance, but also, and importantly, to identify critical attitudes towards tourism among the local population, and also to address these concerns. And to conclude with, I think it is important to note and to be aware of that, as you all know, the pandemic is not only a challenge, but a huge opportunity for a sustainable reorientation of tourism. And what we think is that this transformation should be guided in some form by evidence-based policymaking. And here South Tyrol might be an interesting example, because we have the local DMO that is in the recent years trying to increasingly implement sustainable tourism, and is doing that on the basis of the data that we at our observatory collect. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That's really useful. Sorry, I seem to have an echo. Okay, so our first question is for Felix from one of our YouTube audiences, Sandy McDonald. Have you published anything on the results of your 3 surveys, and can they have the reference, please? So I think you're muted. Just hold on for a moment, Felix, and I think we'll get, there we go.
Yeah, not yet, but our report will be published soon in 2 months from now, and there we will have a summary of all 3 surveys. And there was a press conference and a press release in South Tyrol, but I think for you it might be more interesting to get a comprehensive view of what we did. And if you want, you can give me your contact, and because we are also at the moment working on a different publication, and I can send it to you if you want. Well,
from this webinar, we will collate the slides and any other materials that the speakers are happy to share, and we'll share all of these on the webinar website. So we'll be putting that up there for you, Felix, so people can access any information there. Okay, so just moving on for further questions. I mean, I have a question for Maisa while we're waiting for more questions to come in. So have you seen a growth in domestic tourism since you implemented your research and your strategies?
Well, I can't particularly answer that because I'm not tracking the domestic tourism numbers myself, but we have seen an increase, you know, in locals traveling. There's been also some effort from especially game lodges that are typically aimed at wealthy international travelers. They're quite expensive, and a lot of locals can't afford it, and they have dropped their prices and offering discounts. So South Africans have, you know, been able to access that kind of opportunity where they, you know, pre-COVID would never be able to afford those kinds of experiences. So there has been some shifts in the opportunities available for locals. But our own travel restrictions have also limited that. I mean, we're now again in level 4, and the province that I'm in, where Johannesburg is, has now been sort of closed off. So it's a little bit tricky as we go through our 3rd wave. But we see a lot of our domestic travel happening around the December period, around Christmas, New Year, and the Easter period, so sort of March, April, and those, you know, that travel still continued to happen, even though we had some restrictions in place already around those times. But domestic tourism is taking place, and I think, you know, with people not being able to travel internationally, the domestic tourism is definitely on the rise, but you know, still not very much accessible for many people.
Okay, thank you very much. So those are the questions that we have so far. I'm sure as we move on, people will be thinking of other things to be asking of you, but we do need to move on to our next 2 speakers now. So I think we just give you all a round of applause, and thank you very much for contributing today. So our next 2 speakers are Scott Grime from Visit Britain. Scott is the Tourism Education Development Manager responsible for delivering training and content to support businesses within the English tourism landscape, and has been very busy providing support throughout this academic. We also have Amanda Kotze-Nhlapo, apologies for the pronunciation there, Amanda, the Chief Convention Bureau Officer at the South African National Convention Bureau, which is part of South African tourism, where she works to strengthen South Africa's capacity to support businesses and business events. They will provide a DMO perspective on COVID tourism recovery. And our first speaker, then we'll just move over to Scott. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There we go, my slides are sharing. So just to introduce to those that don't know, so I'm representing Visit Britain and Visit England, and we are the National Tourist Board for Britain and England, and we are an arm's length government body working with the Department for Digital, Culture, Media and Sport. So today I'm going to go through some of the information around rebuilding UK tourism post-COVID, so information on some of the data and how COVID has impacted, and also some of the attitudes to traveling and elements like that. We will also look at the tourism recovery plan that DCMS published just under 2 weeks ago, and how we're supporting on that front, and then also information around sustainability. So just to dive straight in, kind of starting with the 2021 inbound tourism central forecast, and this is in visits. So the data we're looking at mainly is the impact and the number of people traveling into the UK inbound. So you can see here the grey shaded area, that is 2019 figures. The blue dotted line that you can see that takes a dramatic dive early on in 2020 is the 2020 figures. And just to be clear here, the 2020 figures are slightly vague because the normal way we collect data is through the International Passenger Survey. But obviously that stopped running for most of 2020 because of the closure of airports and ports, that kind of thing. So we didn't have anybody from the ONS that were there to survey people. But then the data has been built through other means. So looking at booking data, flight data, that kind of thing coming through. And then 2021 is the more solid blue line. So you can see 2020 had a clear decline that kind of built a little bit for summer, but not much. And then slowly dipping off again. And then 2020 slightly more optimistic with an expectation that there'll be a gradual rise in the volume over the year, and which will start particularly with short haul. So just to kind of exemplify that, so you can see there the data. So the blue lines are Europe, the red lines are long haul. So you can see 2019, the volume of international tourists coming through. You can see that slowly decline over the winter periods, but then really bottoms out as soon as we entered lockdown in the UK. And then we had a slight increase for summer there, mainly with Europeans. And then again, that's kind of faltered as we hit another lockdown in kind of November time. And then we hit our third lockdown in the UK, which was around January to March, April time when we started to see some unlocking. And then we're expecting that to grow slightly then throughout the year, not back to 2019 levels for obvious reasons, but more so with the short haul market than the long haul. Now, it is one thing to note here is obviously we're looking at visits and the volume of international tourists, but if we made this chart into value, we would actually see these gaps between short haul and long haul actually kind of come a bit closer to each other. So value is obviously somewhere that we are focusing majorly on. So the kind of the forecast. So our central forecast, we released this on 7th of May. Now it may have changed slightly because step 4 of the UK's roadmap was delayed by 4 weeks. So there may be some slight changes to this and slight variations, but hopefully not too much of an impact from that. So this latest inbound forecast was released 7th of May. We expect in 2021 that we'll have 11.3 million visits, which is up on 2020, but it's still around, just below a third of the 2019 levels. And then spend is 6.2 billion, which is obviously even bigger decline. And that highlights the difference between short haul and long haul. Obviously, we're expecting more short haul in 2021, but then you can see a bigger impact on the spend and the value of tourism. So we can see this slight downgrade from previous forecast run in January, because obviously we had a forecast that was done in January, but then obviously we went into lockdown. So this is, it was declined slightly. And the forecast assumes that the start to recovery in May, that happened, and albeit slow at first. But as I say, we did have this kind of slower reopening as we got to step 4 of the roadmap. So this may have changed slightly if we reran it. Unfortunately, when we run these forecasts, they kind of go out of date almost as fast as we can run them. Because the situation is changing so fast. And Oxford Economics, tying into what Ben said earlier, forecast is expected that inbound visits will return to the UK by 2024 to kind of pre-COVID levels, so 2019 figures, but spend will kind of start to then creep in later. And that's, again, assuming that more short haul will travel first. And it's also worth mentioning that we're expecting that domestic will return even faster. So just to kind of show the travel horizon. So this is some data that we ran in March and April. It's from our inbound sentiment tracker. So you can see here that this is for short haul first. And what we can see clearly is that there's this pent-up demand for travel in summer. Now, this may not pull off because obviously we've got our traffic light system. There's not as many green list countries as we would potentially hope in terms of returning the volume of visitors back to the UK. But there was a definite desire for people to travel, as we can see here. So throughout the summer period, so July, August, moving into September, we can see those countries like Italy, the Netherlands, Russia, Spain somewhat creeping up there, France, Germany. We can see that there's real pent-up demand. So this is where we're seeing that they will travel back to the UK faster within 2021. But they do, so this is where we get this battle of almost quantity versus quality. So short haul will come back faster and there would be a higher volume of them that travel sooner, but then the spend will be a little bit lower. And this is just one of the battles we'll have through COVID. So then looking at long haul, so long haul is slightly different and more staggered. So travel planning spans over a larger window. Traditional local triggers of travel, so Golden Week in China, post-Ramadan Arabic markets, may offer opportunities to celebrate a back to normal life during the trip. So we'll start to see some movement of summer. So Saudi, the UAE hoping to come back a little bit faster. Following on from there, we've got China, India to start to move up, which are kind of tail end of the year, moving into early 2022. And then we have other markets such as Australia, Brazil, Canada that are then looking into 2022 for early and then through to summer. So obviously this all goes without saying that it's completely dependent on current travel restrictions imposed by all governments. So both the traffic light system as it currently stands, but also restrictions on travel. So for example, Australia, this may be different depending on the Australian government decide to do in terms of international travel. So we can see that there is a slower release. So we'll see short haul coming back first, and then we are expecting to see long haul coming through. And it's worth saying this survey was done in 20 markets with around 11,000 respondents. So then we look at attitudes. So attitudes has been mentioned a little bit. Now we've got a couple of columns here. Again, we're going to go to short haul versus long haul. So the first numbered column you see there is the total. So that's an average of both short and long haul. And then this one will specifically focus on the short haul markets. And the things that we see are the biggest impacts. We've got kind of 4 top attitudes, and they're focused around safety and confidence. So with pre-trip testing being top, so that one kind of trumps that they're happy to take a pre-trip test if they need to travel. Following by visiting less crowded places is a key one across all markets, is that they're looking for these more kind of spacious areas, so maybe rural, coastal areas, that kind of thing. And even if that means missing out on must-see attractions, the desire to travel is there. And then it comes into things like the vaccine. So they'll travel as soon as they can after they get the vaccine. So obviously that depends on vaccine rollouts all over the world, not just in the UK. But obviously that does help in terms of numbers. And then what I think is quite interesting, we've got here as well, travel agents. Obviously there's a big push for confidence. So we're trying to inspire as much confidence as possible. So we have a We're Good to Go industry standard for domestic, and we also partner with World Travel and Tourism Council on safe travels. So anybody that has our domestic industry standard, which is We're Good to Go, can automatically get the safe travels as well. That's been aligned to make sure they match. But then interestingly is this line here is about thinking more sustainably about travel and the impact on the environment of when they're planning any future holidays. So we actually see here that the total average is 63% across both short haul and long haul, but short haul actually falls a bit slightly short of that. So around half of the respondents are thinking about sustainability in the future. Some markets are a bit more clear cut with that. So Italy, Spain, obviously leading the board there. And then we've got some countries like Norway and Denmark that are a little bit behind in terms of this survey. And then if we move into this, it's very similar across long haul. and identifying that sustainability angle there, you actually see that in long haul, this is even more important. So it just shows that the impact of long haul in sustainability terms is obviously greater than it is for shorter travel. We'll see maybe more domestic travel within the UK. But then we've got here, in terms of when we're looking long haul, those markets that I'll be thinking about it the most. So Brazil, China, India, we've got South Korea there, the UAE, Saudi kind of leading the board there. But even still, all of the other markets long haul are still above the percentage of the kind of accumulative short haul markets. So that's a really, really key one that we will see more coming through as we move into the propensity to travel for those markets in terms of when they want to. So kind of move into the tail end of 21 and into early 2022. And by then, obviously, they will be thinking a lot more about sustainability. But it's not to say we've got other attitudes on there as well. So we can see people looking more likely to leave booking till the last minute and just to see what kind of comes up. More people favouring local destinations and domestic travel, and varying other reasons as well. So as part of this, and as part of the recovery for UK tourism and English tourism especially, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, just short of 2 weeks ago, so a week ago last Friday, published the Tourism Recovery Plan, which lays out all the ambitions that the UK government have got in terms of recovering the tourism industry. One almost bittersweet element of COVID has been the fact that it is becoming more and more important on the government agenda in terms of tourism. So we've got some different ambitions here. So we've got about recovering domestic overnight trip volume and spend to 2019 levels. And we're hoping to do that by the end of 2022 in terms of domestic, and then inbound visitor numbers and spend by the end of 2023. So they're kind of slightly more ambitious than the Oxford economics data, but it's where we're sitting there. So both are about trying to recover tourism about a year ahead or a year faster than what the independent forecasts predict. We're then looking to ensure that the sector's recovery benefits every nation and region. So visitors staying longer, growing accommodation occupancy rates in off-season is the really key one. High levels of investment in tourism products and infrastructure, and really moving people around the country, and we'll touch on that a little bit more. But getting people out of honeypots, getting them out of London to see the rest of the world, and really kind of dispersing tourism. We're looking at building back better with more productive, innovative, and a resilient industry. So maximising the potential for technology and data to enhance. So one thing that we're looking at really key, and I'll touch on a little bit later, is a data hub. And it's really about enhancing visitor experience and getting that quality for the visitors, and employing more UK nationals in year-round quality jobs. So obviously someone touched on this in the questions earlier around skills and jobs within tourism and hospitality industry. And obviously we're aiming to try and really build back better and make jobs even more appealing within the UK tourism. And then we've got ensuring that the tourism sector contributes to the enhancement and conservation of the country's cultural, natural and historical heritage. So minimising any damage to the environment, and that it's inclusive and accessible to all. And then we've got returning the UK swiftly to its pre-pandemic position as leading European destination for hosting business events. So that's a snapshot of the ambitions of the Tourism Recovery Plan. You can see it on the government's website. If you search for UK Tourism Recovery Plan, it'll come up for you there. There's a link in this presentation, and as Sarah mentioned, I'll send this presentation through so it can be uploaded later. So then in terms of Visit Britain and Visit England and the activity, so the BTA, just to confuse, we're actually formerly known as the British Tourist Authority. We trade as Visit Britain and Visit England. So the BTA will help deliver the objectives of the Tourism Recovery Plan through its ongoing and planned activity. So the idea is we will help to reopen tourism and hospitality sectors safely by retaining our We're Good to Go industry quality mark, as long as COVID-19 restrictions remain in place. So we want that there because that's set out to do three things: reassure visitors, reassure businesses, and reassure locals that everybody there is following COVID standards in as safe as possible way. We can never be 100% safe, but as safe as possible. So that'll stay there as long as COVID-19 restrictions remain in place. As part of that, we will be supporting businesses as they reopen and recover from the pandemic, and supporting destinations as they bid for various government schemes to help out with this as well. We will be looking to recover domestic and overnight trip volumes 2019 by 2022. and that was 99 million overnight trips and a 19 billion pound spend. And to do that, we'll be supporting with a 5.5 million pound domestic marketing campaign. And we're also looking to deliver a 10 million pound national lottery campaign by offering attraction vouchers to lottery players. And they can be used via the Visit Britain shop. And we're working with the Home Office to scope potential commercial partnerships between Visit England and the UK Visa and Immigration Department. Obviously, we're looking at recovering inbound visitor numbers by 2023, and that was 41 million visits and 28 billion spend in 2019. So we're hoping to get back to those numbers by 2023, and especially that spend by working with GREAT, which is the GREAT department that will look after all sorts of different campaigns throughout the UK government. So we're working with the GREAT campaign to deliver an ambitious overseas marketing activity in 21-22. We'll be ensuring that the benefits of tourism spread to every nation and region by developing new domestic rail tourism products. So we're working with the Rail Delivery Group on a domestic rail pass as well to try and incentivize people to travel around using rail as opposed to private transport, and exploring opportunities to continue and expand our existing Discover England Fund projects to see how we can build in that product that we need. We're looking at building back a more productive and innovative, a resilient tourism industry by investing in transformation of all of our operations and our digital presence. And one of the elements is looking at building a tourism data hub, which is a large data data bank where businesses will be able to go in and get answers to a wide range of questions and really make personalized data. So we're looking at working with various financial institutions, travel agents, tour operators, etc., to combine data so we can really got that data that we need to make really informed decisions when we're moving forward. So we've got the right data at the right time. We're looking to develop an industry that contributes to the enhancement and conservation of the UK's cultural, natural and historical heritage, minimises the impact of the environment. So we're going to touch on that a little bit more. But for example, by considering ways in which Britain's unique food and drink offer can support and encourage responsible tourism. We're looking at positioning Britain as a destination that is welcoming and accessible for all visitors, adopting our activity to be as inclusive as possible. So thinking about access requirements, thinking about different diverse groups and how we can represent everybody. And then also being the leading European nation for hosting business events, attracting international events to take place in the UK and supporting the growth of domestic business through the business events growth programs and funds. So looking into the government sustainability strategy. So we have a 10-point green industrial revolution. So in November 2020, the Prime Minister set out his 10-point green industrial revolution. And 5 of these points are particularly relevant to our sector or have tangible impacts on our operations. So electric vehicles, for example. So the government are looking at backing our world-leading car manufacturing bases, including in the West Midlands, North East and North Wales, to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles and transform our national infrastructure to better support electric vehicles. Public transport, cycling and walking, so making it more attractive to cycle and walk to places, and investing in zero-emission public transport in the future. Jet Zero and Green and Maritime is around supporting difficult to decarbonise industries, so to become greener through research projects for zero-emission planes and ships, and we're starting to see some of that come through. Homes and public buildings, so making our homes, schools, hospitals greener, warmer, and more energy efficient by creating, so we're also looking at creating 50,000 jobs by 2030 in that area, and a target to install 600,000 heat pumps every year by 2028. And then nature, so protecting and restoring our natural environment, planting 30,000 hectares of trees every year, whilst creating and retaining thousands of jobs. And then we also have the net zero commitment. So in June 2019, the government committed to net zero by 2050. And the target will require the UK to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, which is compared to the previous target, which was 80% of reduction of the 1990 levels. So now we're aiming for all greenhouse gas emissions to be net zero by 2050. And in addition, in December 2020, a further commitment was made to achieve at least 68% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2030. So really showing that extra milestone, instead of leaving it all the way to 2050, in the next 10 years or so, really pushing for 2/3 reduction. And then lastly, on this slide, we've got COP26. So the UK will host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference of the Parties at the Scottish Event Campus, which is the SEC in Glasgow. And that is this year, the 1st to the 12th of November. And climate talks will bring together heads of state, climate experts and campaigners to agree coordinated action to tackle climate change. And as COP26 presidency, the UK is committed to working with all countries and joining forces with civil society, companies and people on the front line of climate change to inspire action ahead of COP26. So then looking at framing our approach. So one thing we did here is obviously we went out and did various sessions, and we were asking people what are the challenges preventing sustainable action and what can Visit Britain and Visit England do to support. So sustainability covers a broad range of policy issues ranging from environment to destination management. So we are the National Tourist Board and the National DMO for England and Britain. But within that, in England alone, there are around another 175-ish destination management organisations. And there is an independent review of that going on at the moment in terms of their role. So in order to try and capture this spectrum of policy, we've aligned our themes to the user journey. So we've got pre-trip, dispersal, in-trip activity, and then post-trip and long-term. So looking at pre-trip, we're looking at what information do visitors have access to, what do they receive, what do they get, and how can we help them make sustainable choices. So we're looking at our marketing, the education that visitors get, and also what happens during the booking processes. We've got dispersal, so looking at how we can get visitors to visit all regions of the UK, so and all regions of England, so not just staying within those more crowded honeypot areas. So we're looking at public transport, and one issue at the moment we see with domestic is the lack of confidence in public transport, so we're trying to help that as much as possible. Looking at where we can extend seasons and seasonality, and looking at regional spread. We've got in-trip activities, so how do we reduce waste? How do we make things more energy efficient? How can we better promote environmentally friendly activities and products? So we're looking at our product offering that we push out there in terms of marketing and also what's available in the UK. We look at the provision of services. So what footpaths are there? Where are the car parks? Looking at food and drink and everything to do with the user experience while they're here in the country. And then looking at post-trip and long-term. So what can we do to improve the long-term viability of destinations, and how can we make them economically sustainable? So looking at repair and maintenance programs, looking at destination planning moving forward. So where, as a National Tourist Board, we can work with the local DMOs, who can then in turn obviously work with local government, local planning departments, etc. And looking at community sentiment. So how does the community feel about this? Because that is one big challenge we've had through COVID, is community perception. So just to highlight some of this short haul versus long haul again, so you can see where people are currently considering traveling to. So we've got London as the key. So in short haul, that's nearly half of the market, 46%. And then we've got varying things. So we've got the southeast there in short haul at 28%. We've got the northwest, which is where I live, so it's 26%. And then we've got east of England at 21%. But you can see there's some areas like the northeast, which are fairly low on short haul markets perception. So we need to look at that and how we can spread the inbound visitors out to these areas. So part of that is through our Discover England funded project. So there is one working with the northeast and looking at how we can increase the tourism product there and how we can increase desirability. And then looking at long haul. So long haul actually now, their biggest thing is still London, but not quite as big a margin as it maybe used to have. Northwest, east of England are really creeping up there as well. So we've got some really good figures moving forward, and we really need to try and spread this dispersal as much as possible. And then last slide from me. So our themes and ambitions. So we have dispersal as an underlying theme that continues to be raised throughout our work. So we've got here 3 different elements and then our ambition. So in terms of dispersal, so we're looking at improving seasonal and regional dispersal, because that can have a significant impact on the environment. It can have an impact on local economy and the country's economy and social sustainability of the sector. We're looking at the BTA's objectives, and they are to increase the value of tourism. And so it's not necessarily about the volume, it's about the value and driving dispersal of tourism across Britain. So we can really see, get that money out there as much as possible and really spread people around. So we're applying a sustainability lens to all our work moving forward. We've got transport, so low carbon travel is a barrier for many secondary and rural destinations. especially in the final mile. So the town I live in now, the local bus network has just received a grant from the Towns Fund to increase more electric buses, so we can try and reduce that. And then we've got environmentally friendly options like trains, electric vehicles that require infrastructure. So that's one of the next thing is obviously trying to work with government on that infrastructure is there. And then, like we say, value over volume. So we seek to drive regional and seasonal dispersal, so we can reduce crowding in the honeypot areas. We can reduce crowding in some of the rural areas that are becoming more popular through COVID by extending that season, so we can spread people out over a longer period of time. And we'll focus on increasing spend, encouraging inbound and domestic visitors to extend trips with a greater number of overnight stays, therefore reducing carbon emissions, carbon footprints from more travel. We're seeing more people thinking of extending and doing 1 or 2 longer trips instead of multiple shorter trips. So our ambition will be to support the sustainable recovery of the British tourism sector by improving regional and seasonal dispersal as we rebuild, mitigating the negative impacts of over-tourism and spreading tourism's economic and social benefits to every part of the UK. And that is everything from me. So I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Scott. I was really pleased to see from a personal point of view the introduction of the Tourism Data Hub, because that's something that has bugged me for years, and also the review of the DMOs.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to Amanda now, who's going to give us a perspective from South Africa. So welcome, Amanda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me just share my screen. I hope you can all see my screen. So I know that we are really pressed for time, so I'm going to really not go so much into all the the statistic stuff, and I specifically also focus the statistics on the first 3 months of this year, because that is a year later from when we started with the lockdown rules, and I call this building for the future. Just very quickly, the global outlook, and I don't think that I need to go into this because we will share the slides. But of course, we know that the major economies are not recovered yet to pandemic levels, but there are some in quarter 4 for 2020, according to the Euromonitor. The major economies, have some recovery. And then I think the other thing that is quite important is that, the consumer spend for major countries saw increase in quarter 4 for 2020 compared to the previous quarter. But again, of course, not, pre-pandemic levels. And then, of course, from a travel perspective, the global travel is still 88% below that was in the first 3 months of 2020. For South Africa, it's not much different. Travel out of America is recovering the fastest, and Europe is the second. And then Asia and Pacific is the least recovery region. I think at the moment, it feels if they're in their own bubble, and we all excluded there because we have an office there, and we still couldn't get our people to get back, to the office. But then for South Africa, and like I said, I'm talking about the first 3 months of this this year. And if you are looking at this in comparison with last year, this time, then we are at least get a little bit quicker recovery as the global average. That is 88%, minus 88%. We are minus 84%. I don't know if that 4% is really, but for us, it's giving us some hope, in this dark time. It's very much driven travel from the African markets, and more specifically the African air markets. Although a small base travel from the DRC and Ethiopia, but they are recovering the fastest. In the Africa land markets, Namibia and Zambia are leading the recovery. And the immediate opportunity lies in the North America region, as South Africa recovery lags behind. So for us, we as South Africa, as we are still very much on a lot of countries' red list, as we call it. And of course, we need to keep some hope and do some stuff, to not to stay relevant. And then from a domestic, and I listened very carefully about the domestic, when we had that presentation, but 2.7 million trips, domestic trips, were taken in South Africa for this quarter one. It's minus 43%, but what is important is that it's a month-on-month incremental increase. So that, at least for us, is some positive news. Then for domestic holiday trips, 0.5 million, 500,000, that is minus 65%. And, that was lower compared to 2020. And what is very interesting about this is that it is the fact that last year, this time, was very different in South Africa. And we thought that, COVID is not going to come close to us. And lo and behold, of course, here we are. Domestic day trips also down with minus 45%, and I think it is just the trend that we are seeing. Then, so that can all be gloom and doom, and, but are we still having an industry? Do we need to look at this industry? And the one thing that I can say about, South Africa, and we all know, I'm sure, for all the listeners and delegates for this, is that, tourism in South Africa contributed 4.7%, to the economy. In previous years, and it actually contributed more to the economy than mining, and second to agriculture, that was 5%. And so it is important that we look at our road to recovery, and that we are out there and build again the confidence for our country and destination. So we are following a risk adjustment strategy based on levels of lockdown, and that all has to do with the scientific facts that we are looking at. The priority and objective remain to resume operations as early as it is safe to do so, and it is that balancing act of safe, and wanting to, to keep people safe, but also want to continue economic activity. The tourism sector recovery plan proposed measures to enable reopening and position the country to outcompete in the global recovery market. The plan is also aligned to the South African economic reconstruction and recovery. And the plan was unveiled by the president of the country on 15 October, and particular priority interventions under phase 3. And as you all know, it's support for the recovery and growth of tourism, culture, and creative industries. And we know that it's a start-stop for us for a year now. I have a app that show me my how many lockdown days we are, and it is actually very scary if you look at it. But it is anchored on 3 strategic themes: reuniting demand, rejuvenating supply, and strengthening enable capability. And when I listen to Scott, it's not very different to what we are doing. Then there are 10 strategic recommendations that that we are looking at, and we also will phase it in. With the first phase, protective interventions, then manage the reopening, and then continue into interventions. And, I think for a very long time, that will be the case. The 10-point plan look at the industry and government recovery partnership, very important. It isn't, a government-only ability to look at this. A tourism supply support package, as we know, there were some support, way too little, but as a country and as a developing country, we also know that the fiscus is really under pressure. Biosecurity protocols, I think we can't talk enough about that, because that will build confidence. National air access, we know that we have so little that is left actually at the moment, but it is important that again that we build the bumps on seats, I suppose. Then remove barriers to travel, and I think it's much broader than just. And when I look at this, when we look at this recovery plan, it isn't just because COVID happened. It is also the continuous growth, of this sector, as I said, and how important it is for South Africa. Catalyzed domestic demand, I think we heard enough about that, and we know that whilst we have, and I fully agree, whilst we have all those, the barriers to local travel, it is one of the most important focus areas for us as South African tourism, in conjunction with our industry. Targeted global marketing program. It's difficult to say that we must market whilst people not coming. We're getting asked that question constantly, as we are, agency of government and government funded. It is a question, is it worth it for us to put out the money and no one can come? But if we're not doing that, we all know we will be out of mind, out of sight. And it's important that we still, be out there and do what we do best, and that is to put out, South Africa as the desired destination to visit. Investment and market entry facilitation, very important, our SMMEs. Regional value proposition, I think this also, as Africa, we really need to come together as Africa and put out there a proposition that is, that is not, that no one can actually say no to. And then, of course, transform the institutional architecture of the industry, and as well as, tourism bodies. Then just very quickly, we cannot go, hit and miss. We know that, as I said, very little money, but a lot that need to be done. And so what we have is a MIF, as we call it, the Marketing Investment Framework. We review it. And we now got to a point where we have 24 markets, from 42 markets. But it is also, very much focused and informed with data. And then also investment allocation and management. If we have to overlay this with how the country or our markets open, to see where do we put our, where do we put our money and where do we take a little bit away. So just to show that this is the selection of the 21 million tourists, that if we, by 2030, we were supposed to meet a target of 21 million. Did we look at it and work it? No, it's still out there as a target. And this is the 24 countries that we will use, or that we will be focused on for this portfolio. In 2019, this portfolio gave us 83% of our holiday arrivals, 77% of our Maisa arrivals, and 92% of total international arrivals to South Africa in 2019. So it is definitely a framework that is working for us. Then it has to be overlaid, as I said, with the 24 countries, when they will likely to be traveled. And you can see there, the green ones is a high marketing intensity, the orange is medium, and then the brown is low. And that's really, as I said, with how much money we spent in the marketing. So the 24 MIF priority markets will, get the full package, if I can put it like that. Our domestic market, very important that we're building resilient and sustainable domestic tourism market, against the future adverse economic conditions. Rest of the world, we will assist them. We will keep on assisting them, working through our Department of International Relations and Cooperation. And the digital marketing marketplace, very important that we build those capabilities so that we can get our SME market access. Then the reignite demand, the brand strength index, we unblock, we are going on to a global advocacy campaign to remove barriers, to talk about the barriers that, you know, that is keeping travel away from South Africa. We have a new global brand positioning that we want to, roll out at our conference in September 2021. As South African Tourism, we own 2 trade shows. The one is Africa's Travel in Durban, and the other one Meetings Africa, that focus on the MICE industry. And of course, as we know, not be able to have these events, that was for us a big a driver of demand. We want to do a targeted conference that will reintroduce not just South Africa, but the African product, or reintroduce to the world. And then, of course, we also look at Dubai Expo as an opportunity to be top of mind and keep top of mind. Then just very quickly to the business events industry, we are busy to build the pipeline. And this is one of the things that I think out of the recovery, that whilst we cannot have meetings at the moment and conventions and expos, the fact of the matter is this is an industry that can fill the pipeline. And so we are actively bidding for these events and supporting these events. And because it is so important for us, we also reviewed our bid support program, to include also the hybrid, sector of this event. I keep on saying, to my leisure colleagues that, when you look at business events, it's one of those meetings are still continued, even if it is like this. And I hate to be behind the screen and not be part of, of the face-to-face. But the fact of the matter is meetings are there to, to come up with solutions, to help recovery, help to, to come up with plans, for the industry. And therefore, the meeting sector is extremely important. And we also adapted, the bid support program so that it can include that. Then we also then look at a national association strategy. And all that this is really to look at how can we host conferences in small towns and have tourism being part and parcel. And it's very much part of our domestic strategy, where we want our national association having their meetings in smaller towns. So we are building 27 small towns so that it can be out there. And we can, and also what is very important is that the people that host these conferences will have to move their dates from a Monday to a Tuesday or a Thursday to a Friday, so that we can have, a shoulder weekends pre and post, and we can so also build and encourage, domestic tourism. And we, like I said, we identified 3 towns in each of the provinces, and we will hopefully in the last quarter, when things look a little bit better, we will have 3 of those events that happen in different towns. And then just from the supply side, I think, we work very much closely with the Grading Council, is also part of South African tourism. And quality assurance is for us very important, that we can build that confidence in our destination. I keep on saying to our industry, we all need to be part of going for gold, so that we can reach at the end of the day the 21 million as we so badly need that in our country. But we also have protocol compliance that we look at, and it is no longer an issue of communication, it's now an issue of enforcement to make sure that our sector adhere to the protocols. And then, of course, continue with product development, making sure this time also gave us some time to do some audit on what is the product, and then very much so to look at what is the international market look for. And there's many research, and I could go on forever, but so that we can align that money that we are spending in our global campaigns to what the international market are looking for. And one of the things that we know is authenticity as well as new, because most of a big percentage of our of our numbers when they are coming, our tourists are return visitors, and they are also looking for new products, and this also gives us that opportunity. And then, of course, we keep on doing graded products and renew, looking at renewed and innovative ideas. And one of them are that we are very proud that we have 21 premium products across the country. And as the previous speaker also said, that these products are products that were exclusively for international tourists, but they are coming along as part of the Grading Council and offer better prices also and value for money to our local tourists. Then just as a last thing is that marketing in the uncertain and uncharted times is, is doing enough. It's balancing between doing enough marketing to remain top of mind while keeping track of the national vaccination rollout and evaluation of the visa regime, and then being ready to launch when target markets mutually open with South Africa while keeping track of unpredictable changing market conditions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Thank you for sharing your ambitious recovery plan. And it was interesting to see that you have a similar dispersal strategy to Scott. That was very interesting. So we do have a question for both of you, actually, and that's it's from Suyu Kongru and Sandy McDonald around vaccination passports and how this might build business or build confidence. I don't know who would like to go first. Perhaps Scott, since you're unmiked.
Yeah, no problem. In terms of vaccine passports, I mean, there's various iterations of them, isn't there, around the world? There is currently plans from the UK government and from Grant Shapps to set out his plan for vaccinated tourists coming into the UK. So we've seen that there will be proposed 3-stage. We've not got the exact details on it, but it's likely will start for UK residents to start with. I suppose the difficult part of vaccination passports is because we've got so many systems around the world of reporting your vaccinations. That's where it becomes difficult. So, and not only that, we have some countries. So, a UK and USA travel corridor is ideal, but the US don't yet recognize the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine as a COVID vaccine. So therefore that adds extra implications. So it's something that this country is looking at moving towards as a way of not restricting travel, but changing if you have to quarantine, if you come from specific countries, that kind of thing. So it's something moving towards. We've also seen industries such as cruise lines at the moment. So MSC was probably the only cruise line that didn't need vaccinations to cruise around the UK. As of Monday, they've changed that. So you now have to be vaccinated 2 weeks after your second vaccine is what they class as a vaccine, or medically exempt. So it's not about age exemptions, but medical exemptions. And that's so that they could increase the capacity on their ships. So they were limited to 1,000, whereas now they can go to around 3,150 people if everybody on there is double vaccinated. So it's something that seems to be creeping in more. There are definite plans for it to start in the UK, but as the UK government have said, it's very complicated, and there's going to be a very complicated policy around it because of all the varying systems around the world and who will accept what and who's got what proof and various things. And you look at Malta, for example, who will only accept a paper vaccination certificate. They won't accept the NHS app. So, it's complicated, but it seems to be that's where we're starting to head.
Thank you, Scott. Amanda, we just need to...
I don't think that I can actually say much more than what Scott said. I think what for me, it's really scary, when I think about it and I think of what the impact of it can be, to and specifically for us as a country, and of course, it will help a lot with saving a lot of cost if you don't have to go on to into 14 days. I know that up till now if we wanted to go to Dubai for the Dubai Expo, for instance, we were supposed to be 14 days outside South Africa somewhere and then go to Dubai. Now it changed already. If you can come with a vaccination, but it is it is just a scary thought. But I don't think that one everyone. I think of how did it start when we all had to have a yellow fever, yellow fever, and it was yellow, certificate, and you come if you want to go to, to Brazil, and you have to, present that. But I don't think that in the world that we are connected today, it is as easy as what it was, a few years ago.
Okay. Thank you very much. We'll pick up any further questions at the end of the session. So thank you. So our final speaker is Deon, a visualizer at Travelling Circus. He has an ambition for telling visual stories of people and places. At Travelling Circus, they believe in a world where travel creates connection and empowers local communities. And Deon will speak to us about destination stewardship in practice, providing us with examples of how it can be done. I'm looking forward to this, Deon. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. And greetings to you all from a beautiful desert landscape in Namibia, right here on the southern corner of Africa. And this is not a fake background. It's actually really where I'm at the moment. So I'm very happy to talk to you guys. I'm just going to quickly share my screen here. Right. Perfect. Can everybody see that? Right. So my name is Deon Pienaar, and I am from an organization called the Travelling Circus. We are a bunch of circus folk. Sometimes we are clowns, sometimes we are jugglers, sometimes we are contortionists, but we operate within the Southern African landscape to essentially develop sustainable ecosystems. And we do that through a destination stewardship perspective. And I think what I'm really going to do today is I'm going to, instead of an academic perspective, I'm really going to shed a little bit of light on how we can actually really build our sustainable ecosystems within destinations in practice. I think people are often at a loss in terms of, we receive all of this information and all of these academic stats, but we often don't know how to implement that in a relevant way within the spaces we occupy, whether that's on a small scale grassroots destination level or on a national level, taking into account, for example, South Africa as a destination. But it's such a diverse space, and the tourism industry itself is so broad that I think people often don't quite know where to start. And I really want to take us back to what Ben was saying right in the beginning, where we need to look at new perspectives. We need to look at finding alternative ways to redefine what it means to be a DMO, and how we transfer or shift our focus to something that looks at a place-making concept, and how do we empower and enable our communities, and how do we build community, and I think that's really what I want to talk to you about today. Something that I think is familiar to everybody in a business as usual kind of world is the concept of T's and C's. And I think if we're talking about sustainable ecosystems into the future, T's and C's apply, although we do need to look at redefining what those terms and conditions are for us as a global community, as a society moving forward in shaping our futures. So if we unpack this and we start looking at the terms that we are dealing with, we have all of these tourism threats and barriers that we talk about and we unpack and we research. And at the bottom line of it all is that these threats, it's almost like a mathematical equation. These threats over time equals urgency, because we just do not have the time to take it slow, to see where it goes, to not find relevant solutions on the ground that is actually impactful and creates positive impact within the spaces that we occupy. So it's much like a wave. We need to create momentum. We need to generate buy-in for these sustainable ecosystems. And that requires us to read the fine print, but to also redefine what that fine print is. What are our non-negotiables within the space? So if we're looking at the terms, we are a ticking time bomb. And unless we find a way to really build the momentum and generate collective buy-in as destinations, we're really going to run into serious trouble. So as the Traveling Circus, we've been operating in the southern parts of Africa, specifically South Africa, where we've got a big, strong foothold in the Limpopo province, which is one of the northern provinces, but we also work throughout the rest of the country, as well as Namibia, which is one of our neighboring countries, where we really work on a grassroots level to build these local ecosystems. And we have found in our experience that a lot of these things really rely on a certain amount of conditions. And I'd like to call them the big C's. And I think, you know, we can come up with all sorts of words that start with C that are really relevant in this space. But I've highlighted, and in my presentation, I'm going to just explain a few of these things that we found that have really shown how we can build this momentum and generate this collective buy-in. One of the first C's is that we need to take on an approach of unlearning, a mindset of unlearning, in a sense, a catharsis. We're at a point now where we almost need to purge. We need to forget everything that we have learned over the past 100 years, and really start with a clean slate to identify what are the things that are important to us moving forward. We've got to open our minds. We've got to set our minds free, because if we keep on holding on to the past, we're holding on to solutions that actually are not serving us and are not relevant in this new future that we're, this journey into the future that we're embarking on. So I really think that's the starting point, and it's not an easy thing to do, to just forget everything that you've learned and to see things from a very open-minded perspective. So first and foremost, catharsis is really that purging that we need to, as a collective, in terms of our global tourism community, for one, we need to really start addressing and unpacking what that clean slate looks like, and how do we start painting on that new canvas. And one of the things that we have found is really, really important in that space is the idea of the collective thinking. A fish on its own can easily be eaten by the shark. But if we come together, there's a serious power in the idea of collective thinking. And we can really, face adversity as a people if we take on a collective thinking mindset. So some ways in which we've really seen some serious value in terms of the collective thinking approach. For example, in Limpopo province, where we work quite extensively, when COVID hit last year, we really started engaging with our local ecosystem and our local community to see how we could support the tourism community to access the domestic market. As an entity, one of the services that we provide to tourism businesses is content creation and assisting businesses to tell their story through evocative photographs, videos, telling the stories of these spaces to inspire travelers to come and experience what our destinations offer. And what we realized was that traditionally, video content creation is something that is so expensive. And in our business as usual world, we've got this sense of what about me? It's always about me as a business in isolation. It's about our bottom line. How is this impacting my business? How is this of value to me? And what we did is we approached a group of role players within a very small part of the Limpopo ecosystem. There is a destination called Magubas Kloof, which is an adventure, nature-based destination. Lots of hiking products, outdoor activities, slow food. So it's a very rich and popular destination. But we really wanted to increase the overall messaging that that area was still open and very much conducive to travel within a COVID context, because a lot of the accommodation is self-catering, so it's easy for guests to isolate in a sense, no contact check-ins, outdoor space to breathe. So we approached a group of our stakeholders, and we said, right, how can we bring the video creation or the content creation service to the collective, reducing our rates into a space where it's really possible for small businesses to access, because in the South African context, a lot of our businesses are small, single, owner-run spaces, and usually marketing budget is the first thing that gets cut when it's in times of trouble. So we brought a collective together and we said, right, guys, if we can get 15 people, for example, to buy in to this content creation campaign, we can reduce our rates significantly, yet in the same time still make it viable for ourselves to, financially viable for ourselves to bring this service. And lo and behold, we got 18 tourism businesses that signed up and said, right, we want to do this. What that resulted in was a 2-month domestic travel campaign. We reached just over 700,000 people on our social media. And if you convert that or calculate the ROI on that, assuming a 0.1% conversion at the daily average spend of an average South African traveler, the area over that 2 months had an economic injection of well over 500,000 South African rand. And that really showed us the power of how we could, as a collective and as a unit, really generate value for our local destinations. So in principle, the idea of collective thinking was really valuable to us. I think if we take that approach, things like crowdfunding, we also want to bring the traveler into this ecosystem. How do travelers support the development of our destinations? And an example in Namibia, for example, when COVID hit, we work with a series of community-based living museums. It's a space where there's a lot of indigenous cultures that really rely on international travel for their income. And the result of COVID was that many of these communities were going hungry. It's the bottom of the Maslow's hierarchy. People just actually do not have food to eat as a result of the complete halt of tourism. And we really took on an approach where we developed some films and assisted some of these communities to create crowdfunding campaigns. For one of our communities, within 2 weeks, we managed to raise 6,000 Australian dollars through a partnership with an individual in Australia who really connected to that community on a previous visit and wanted to support. So in a collaborative way, we then supported that community. And even though it can sound like aid, it was really something that spurred that community on to become more sustainable. And actually be less reliant on the idea of funding. So they used that money to install a solar pump and a tank so that they could actually provide water to their community. They started a vegetable garden and a chicken project where they were actively actually, benefiting from the product, but they were also then starting to sell that product, and it started generating an alternative revenue for that community. So many ways in which we as a collective can participate in really building our destinations. The other C that I think we've also heard throughout this entire presentation or webinar is the idea of collaboration and co-creation. And it's so important for us when we look at ecosystems, not to just look at the people. We also need to look at nature as a stakeholder and an active role player within the ecosystem. And we need to find and build collaborative partnerships co-creation is absolutely key if we want to find sustainable solutions. No man is an island. I cannot come up with a solution for something and think that that is going to be the most effective way, unless there is consultation with other people, unless we bring in people from across the spectrum to help us ideate and find solutions. It's always going to be one-sided. In terms of the partnerships, one key example of how we've been working is about 4 years ago, we started partnering with very good friends of ours who run a tour operating company in the UK, Tour de Force Adventure Logistics. And Tour de Force approached us to say that they are really looking as a tour operator to become more sustainable, and not just in providing economic benefit during their visits to some of these far-flung places across the globe, but they wanted to assist in creating a longer-term sustainable impact through their the work that they're doing in those spaces. And the concept that we came up with was a concept of a development levy. Tour de Force operates within a space where their clients are pretty high-end and have the financial means to travel. They are well-traveled. They've traveled to many different places across the globe. And they themselves also have a desire to create more meaningful impact. So within the 4 years, we've really managed to fund the constant work on the ground, supporting local community products, and really actively building this ecosystem from within, because one operator really saw the potential outside of themselves as an entity. So really, really important. And in the same breath, we are all part of a webinar that is a result of a collaboration between the University of Northampton, the University of Johannesburg, the Future of Tourism Coalition, ourselves. These are important things that we need to continue doing and to really unpack how we really make this information relevant on a grassroots level. So I can't stress more the power of collaboration. We had a question earlier on about, if government is not supporting local tourism associations, just keep on going, pulling those people into the network, be a little, Jack Russell at the heels of these entities and keep on spreading the word, fighting the good fight. And that's the only way. Through action, people start realizing the importance of what we are doing, because they are seeing the actual impact and the results. And this means buy-in, which we have seen in Limpopo province. We've got a very good relationship with our local governments, tourism associations. There's still a long road to really find the dance and to find the positive impacts and the roles that all of these individual stakeholders play within that space. But it is already there, and I think this is where the element of urgency comes in. We've got to keep on going, and we've really got to have more platforms like this so that we can get our message out and get people to opt in to these terms and conditions. Communication, it's another C, absolutely important. There are so many examples of positive things that are happening in communities, in destinations, things that are working to create positive impact, and often we don't talk about it. We don't shout it from the mountaintops. We've got to really talk about these things that work in order for people to buy in. But more importantly, we've also got to enable our ecosystems to tell their stories, to share it with the world. It's also about just talking, listening. It's important, when we think about communication, we think it's all about just, spreading the word. But listening is such an important element for us to understand what is actually needed on the ground. It also is a thing that then provides people or gives people a sense of value. Often when you work in rural communities, it's a struggle. People are struggling for basic needs. So that impacts on their personal value and how they perceive themselves within this world. So when you bring people into this ecosystem and make them part of something, there's a shift that happens. People really then start actually valuing themselves and the role that they play within that space, however big or small. it's an important part of our collective growth. So communicating, spreading these stories, but also working with people and seeing them for who they are is really of utmost value. The last element that I'm going to talk about is probably the most important one, and that is connection. I think what COVID has done is it has really put us into a space, although our world prior to COVID was already fragmented and people are living their lives. It's a what about me space. You know, people are taking care of their own needs, and we are losing connection at a rapid pace. People are being separated from each other. We're living in our own bubbles. And what we found is that connection lies at the heart of it all. For a traveler, for local communities, if we lose the heart, we're lost. So I really want to stress that, you know, even though we have all of this academic research and we are focused on tourism recovery from an economic perspective, the one thing that we need to bring into that equation, it's not a one or the other, but if we bring back the heart to everything we do, then it's going to spill over into meaningful change and not just lip service, which unfortunately is what a lot of this can be if it's not done within that space of compassion and caring and connection. It's absolutely critical. So I'm going to end this off, and I want to leave you with probably a quote from one of the most famous academics in our time, and that is Albert Einstein. He says, as human beings, we're a part of a whole called the universe, a part limited in time and space. We experience ourselves, our thoughts and our feelings as something separated from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of this consciousness. This delusion is kind of a prison for us, and it's restricting us to our personal desires and to affection for a few persons nearest to us. Our task now must be to free ourselves from this prison and widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature in its beauty. So in that, I really want to leave you with this thought. Go and unpack your own terms and conditions as a person, as a human, not just somebody sitting inside an industry focusing on economic growth. It's critical for us to come together as a people if we are going to make this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deon. Thank you very much for that inspiring quote, and also reminding us about our own personal responsibilities in relation to tourism. Okay, we're going to bring back all of our guests now, and we have, thank you, we have a couple of questions here. The first one is for Felix from Anna Russell via YouTube. What role are the UN Sustainable Development Goals playing in the management of sustainable tourism in South Tyrol?
Can you hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Awesome. Well, I think the SDGs play a hugely important role for sustainable tourism in South Tyrol, but not only in South Tyrol. And we think that the SDGs have created some sort of framework of ambition, most explicitly the goals 8 and 12. And they were able to contribute to an increased importance of sustainability in tourism policies. And for instance, also the regional government in South Tyrol has explicitly committed to the SDGs and has set up a platform together with the official regional statistics office, where they monitor and communicate, so make publicly available the level of achievement with each of the goals. And also we in our report, we try to connect our indicators with the SDGs. But what we realized in this process is that, and what is also a bigger issue at the global level, is that for most of the SDGs, not very much data is available. So data coverage is a big problem. And that means that we don't really know where we are right now in the progress. And this makes it difficult to then decide on and develop the right and adequate policies. And the other issue is that most of the data that we do have is then from 2 years ago or longer ago. So we also need more timely data. And that overall, I think that we need an improvement in the measurement and monitoring of the SDGs, but also sustainability indicators more broadly. And that's basically what we also are trying to do at our observatory.
Okay, thank you, Felix. Our final question is for Maisa from Barna Hillary. Given that from a fiscal point of view, domestic tourism is not considered to cover the gap that international tourism receipts made up, how can domestic tourism be leveraged through your strategy?
Thanks, Sarah. Firstly, hi, Hillary, long time no see. Thanks for the question. I don't think it's realistic to expect domestic tourism to just close that gap. I mean, the income that is generated by international tourism is huge, and given the situation which I discussed in South Africa around the issues related to the barriers around domestic tourism, we can't just expect domestic tourism to provide a quick fix and replace that income stream. But what is important to note is that, like what Amanda was talking about around the recovery of our regional markets, that movement is happening, and that sort of regrowth or recovery is also contributing to that drop in international income. So, and our international numbers, the majority are made up of that, especially Africa land markets. So we can't just rely on domestic tourism, and unfortunately, we need to really look at this as a long-term strategy rather than a quick fix, and as an opportunity for us to try and leverage domestic tourism more going into the future and addressing the issues which have sort of stopped, complicated the growth of domestic tourism in the last few decades.
Okay, thank you very much, Maisa. So it just leaves me to do some concluding remarks. I really want to thank all of our speakers today for some really interesting topics that will challenge us all going forward into the future. And we started today by asking, why do we want tourism? And I think that's an important question for a lot of DMOs as we review the way that they should be working in the future and their role, particularly in relation to placemaking and the need to address the invisible burden that tourism can bring to communities. We also learned about the challenges of generating domestic tourism. And I think all of us will note, today we learned about that from a South African perspective, but I think we will all note that from our own country's perspectives as well as they grapple with that. We also looked at the changing attitudes and behaviours of tourists during this COVID period, and we learnt about the recovery plans for South Africa and the UK. And finally, we finished with, I can't remember whether it was 4 or 5 C's, and the need to work at the grassroots level, and also for all of us to take a personal viewpoint in relation to the way in which we work in tourism, but also how we act as tourists. So a really interesting discussion, and I can see there will be an absolute rush to our site to review all of your presentations today. So thank you very much.